The 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference, more commonly referred to as Conference of the Parties or COP27, was held in Egypt this year. This year's event marked the 27th conference, where the 197 countries that have ratified the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change met. The United Nations Framework Convention established an international environmental treaty to combat dangerous human interference with the climate system, in part by stabilizing greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. The treaty also calls for scientific research, negotiation, and future policy agreements designed to allow ecosystems to adapt naturally to climate change, to ensure that food production is not threatened, and to ensure that economic viability is sustained in developing and developed countries. The United Nations Framework Convention endorses the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities in climate context. This means that while developing countries are expected to contribute to climate mitigation, developed countries are expected to take the lead in combating climate change and the adverse effects that climate change causes. Pakistan has been battered by back-to-back climate catastrophes in recent years. These include floods, heat waves, and forest fires, and Pakistan is struggling to find the financing that it needs to recover from the unprecedented flooding that started in June this year, inundating a third of the country. At COP27, Pakistan made a case for the Loss and Damage Fund. Loss and damage refers to the harm and destruction that happens when people and places are not prepared for climate-driven impacts and have not or cannot adjust to the way they live or protect themselves from long-term shifts in climate change. Climate funding so far has focused on cutting carbon dioxide emissions in an effort to curb climate change, while about a third of it has gone towards projects to help communities adapt to future impacts. Loss and damage funding would be different than compensating costs, in the sense that these are costs that countries who can't afford the cost of climate change will be provided for. Pakistan is not the only one suffering. Vulnerable countries have argued that rich countries that cause the bulk of climate change with their historical emissions should now pay. The legal issue is that there is no established definition of loss and damage under international law, and the term is not used and therefore not defined in the United Nations Framework Convention. This term is a creature of COP decisions, but its boundaries are not fixed in those decisions. This makes the implementation of any framework based on loss and damage very difficult. A normative framework based on international law is necessary to give the mechanism of loss and damage calculation and legitimacy. It will provide legal underpinning to the mechanism, which will strengthen the convention-mandated process. A good starting point could be that the mechanism already present in international law for the calculation of transboundary harm. The International Court of Justice has already recognized the general obligation of states to ensure that activities within their jurisdiction and control respect the environment of other states. One possible mechanism could be to set a minimum threshold for a state to claim loss and damage, while at the same time imposing a no-harm rule on all states. Whatever the mechanism, appropriately addressing this regulatory gap in the Convention and international law is crucial to enhancing the mitigation efforts necessary to combat climate change disasters, especially now that the decision to establish a loss and damage fund has already been taken.